custom cars on Modern Marvels.
Torque converter locks up a little, slows it back down.
Didn't see those since the 60s.
They're a triumph of mechanical ingenuity and a visual feast on wheels. From highboy roadsters to hopping lowriders to tricked-out import tuners. Custom cars are as various as the people who craft them and as singular as a fingerprint.
Cars are what we all have in common, but hot rodders and customizers embrace them in a way that nobody else does. They use their cars not only as transportation, but as a means of creating something almost from scratch that they could call their own.
The classic customs and hot rods from decades past are cherished by collectors and showcased in galleries and museums.
The Niekamp Roadster was the first America's Most Beautiful Roadster winner, 1950, Oakland Roadster Show. If we ever put that car for sale, I think it would bring $400,000 or $500,000.
But for most customizers, the point isn't to create a museum piece or even a prize for best in show. It's to move on down the road, to see and be seen.
One of the commonalities between hot rods, lowriders, tuners, is that they can be built piece by piece by piece by piece. These cars are like oysters, you know, one layer after another.
The car represents an art form. The only difference between us and people that put it on paper is we do our art and then we drive it around. That's what we do.
Whatever its vintage, restructuring an automobile to enhance its style is hard physical work. Customizer Gene Winfield's masterful metalwork and exquisite paint schemes have made him a legend in the field. At his shop in the Mojave Desert, he incorporates original designs, from molded grills to louvered hoods, to ensure that each car he customizes is unique.
Each and every car, I look at it and maybe I study it for a little while, and then I try to figure out things that I can do that'll be a little different. With custom cars, we try to put different grills, different taillights, and things so that each and every car has at least some things that are totally different than the other guy.
Winfield lowers the roof of a 1949 Mercury the way he's done it for the last 50 years.
Drop an inch here.
With hand tools, elbow grease, and a hard-earned degree in backyard technology, it's called chopping the top.
What we're aiming for here, of course, is a typical chopped Mercury, which is, you know, all Mercury should be chopped, in my opinion. So that's what we're going to do, and we're going to chop it approximately 4 inches in front and 5 in the rear.
Winfield begins by installing temporary braces inside the car to keep the body stable. Then he measures the windshield and calculates how much he'll remove from the supporting pillars to achieve the desired slant.
This is called the A pillar, this is the B pillar, and this is the C pillar. So on this particular chop, I'm going to cut it out completely, I'm going to re-angle it, and then we're going to have what we call a slanted post.
While tracing his cuts along the belt line, Winfield marks a section for removal at the C pillar, so the top will have room to settle when it's lowered.
Okay, so now we're going to start cutting. Okay.
After cutting the pillars, Winfield marks more cuts to flatten the curve of the roof.
See, that's the big problem in the Mercuries. They have a kind of a big dome in the roof right here, and we have to stretch that forward and get rid of that. And that allows the top to go forward and down to a new angle. Stretch it forward.
Finally, it's time to check out the chop. The initial chop looks good, but Winfield will fine-tune its shape to achieve the ideal proportion.
That's the most important thing on a Mercury, is to get that flow. And that's just super important to get that right. That's the way we do it to get a classic chopped Mercury.
Custom work by Winfield and countless others is displayed at shows throughout the country.
So you notice how the steering is, where you can put the box right here?
There, drivers swap parts and stories and admire the details of each other's craft.
This is slick.
Oh, it's total Americana. You're making a statement about who you are, what you do, what you enjoy, and you're letting everybody else see it and letting everybody else appreciate it.
For all their differences, car customizers have long shared a do-it-yourself spirit and a distinctly populist ethic. For generations, they've been disregarding Detroit's top-of-the-line models in favor of everyday people's cars, from Model A's to modern imports, and then doing whatever it takes to restyle them into the rods and customs of their dreams.
As far as the culture and the lifestyle, they're different. The cars are very much different, but the common factor is the passion.
Ever since cars began to roll off assembly lines, customizers have tried to make them look better and run faster. But the root of today's custom cultures can be traced to the 1930s and a racing scene that took shape on the dry lakes of Southern California.
The dry lakes were just like, a cemented lake. I mean, it's perfectly flat. It's so smooth and it's so hard, and you can just drive as fast as you want for as long as you want, and that's what these guys did.
By the mid-30s, the car of choice was a Ford Roadster. The 32 Roadster was the first that came equipped with an inexpensive 8-cylinder engine, known as the Ford Flathead. The car's distinctive grille molded into the body was undeniably stylish. More practically, like other Roadsters, its cloth top and windshields were easily removed.
My father's 32 Roadster, that was the family car. They only had one car. I mean, it went to get the groceries, it went to take my dad to work and back, and then my mother used it when he wasn't using it. And then come the weekend that they were going to go to the dry lakes, the fenders came off, the running board came off, headlights.
The Roadster was the cheapest model in the line. It was the lightest model in the line because it didn't have a roof, it didn't have side windows, and it was kind of sporty.
With little history to guide them, the Dry Lakes racers customized their cars by trial and error. Bigger tires in the rear changed the gear ratio for a better top speed, while smaller ones up front decreased wind resistance. The front end could be lowered by heating and dropping the front axle. The result? A gently sloping angle, or rake, of 3 to 4 degrees, which came to define the classic hot rod look for decades to come.
When you race on the dry lakes, you can either make horsepower or you can streamline it. They both have the same effect. They both make the car go faster, and they did both.
Many of the Dry Lakes racers were mechanical mavericks. In the late 1930s, Vic Edelbrock Sr. designed and machined a manifold to increase air fuel intake. He called it the Slingshot because of its Y-shaped design. Ed Iskandarian ground camshafts that increased engine performance at high RPMs.
It's guys that are smart enough to figure out how to make the stuff they need when they don't have it.
You didn't go buy your parts, you just took the existing parts and made them better, or made a manifold like my dad did. He had a knack of looking at something in an engine, an internal combustion engine, and figuring out what was wrong, what it needed, and to go from there.
The Dry Lakes scene came to a temporary halt with the onset of World War II. But many of the racers found work and developed new ideas in the wartime aeronautics industry.
They came back from the war, they knew how to machine parts, they knew what a combustion engine was like, they knew how superchargers worked, they had some rudimentary idea about aerodynamics, witness the belly tank racers.
After the war, Dry Lakes racer Bill Burke built a race car using an aluminum fuel tank from a fighter plane. He built a model for Alex Exidius, founder of the SoCal Speed Shop, who sat it on a pair of Ford Model A and B axles. Racing in Utah at Bonneville in 1952, Exidius's belly tank racer set 5 speed records and eventually exceeded 200 miles per hour.
This is the car that put the SoCal Speed Shop and SoCal, California on the map. This is Alex's original belly tank from which he began racing in 1948 through 1952. Set a ton of records in this car with no roll cage, no safety belt, nothing.
A lot of young guys came back and they'd been flying P-51s and, you know, doing fighter jockeys, and they were suddenly dumped back into slow motion. And I think the need for speed was even greater in the post-war era. And that's when it really took off.
As dry lake racing grew more popular, its innovators began to set up shop throughout Southern California, laying the basis for a growing industry in aftermarket parts. As word spread, their products were snapped up by a very different group of car customizers. Southern Moonshiners.
And so they started mail ordering camshafts and intake manifolds for their V8 flathead Fords to put into their 40 Ford tankers or moonshine cars.
When Junior Johnson would make his nightly run, and he was running White Lightning, he had an old pickup truck, looked old on the outside, was all new on the inside, and it had an Edelbrock-equipped Ford Flathead in it that absolutely ran away from the feds.
Unlike the Dry Lakes racers, bootleggers needed to keep